Thank you, Buster. And my other name, since Buster's laid out, is Mama Joyce. So, greetings from North Carolina to all of you, to our friends and our co-creators of justice, equity, dignity, healing, and the unlimited possibility for our children. That justice, that dignity, that worth, that is rooted in love, deep love, rooted in truth, and guided by humility and commitment. There's so many connections between people from Mississippi and people from North Carolina. Whenever we talk about coming here, I think about certain names, Hollis Watkins and Johnny Wall. I think Nelson actually worked on a few of his campaigns, and Derek Johnson. And I just learned yesterday, one of our better newscasters in Greensboro, Frank Meekin's mom. You know, I kept looking, I was like, she looks familiar. Well, it's Frank's mom. And then those of us, particularly those of us who are women, just learned so much from Fannie Lou Hamer. You know, just the strength and the commitment. So it's good. And of course, there are people like William Buster, who also have passed through our town in Greensboro, who now calls it home, and we claim him as a son of Greensboro. Like so many southern towns, Greensboro is like a paradox. It's a beautiful city, rich history of achievements, yet it's a city that's just rife with hardships and ugly things. It's a university town, yet it's a mill town, or at least it used to be a mill town before the mills closed up and moved abroad. It's a town that dragged its heels against integration, yet it's a city that helped launch folk like Ron McNair, the black astronaut, and Jesse Jackson and 3 of his children, and just a lot of other people. It's a city that a few years ago, we had a black woman as mayor, black person as the director of social services, black person who's the chief of police, everybody but the chief of the fire department. I never quite could figure that one out, was black. But then a few years later, really 2010, on the beginning part of the Tea Party movement, there was a reversal, and a lot was lost by 800 stolen votes. So what I want to convey to you is that Greensboro, like in North Carolina, like Mississippi, is just rich with chapter after chapter of resistance and what have you. But what I mainly want to share with you, what we want to share with you, is that though the struggle is long, we've been able to hold on to each other, and we want to encourage you where you might be getting weary, because you're going to get weary, to hold on to each other. That is a lot of the victory right there. Not just the issue, but being with each other, appreciating each other, and while we're working on the issues, allowing the healing to begin. And it's a step-by-step process. So I just want to begin with that, and then move to a clip that I'm going to tell you is really pretty raw. As Buster has already described some of it, it's not reality TV. It's TV about the real thing. But it was an incident, an event that happened over 30 years ago, yet it is ancient. As Gail shared with you, it's really ancient. But from that tragedy, we've been stepping piece by piece toward a triumph for all of humankind. And we just invite you to step with us, because it's really not just about us. We realize that some of what we've been through is about all of us, and that we are just blessed to offer ourselves as just one small example of what can happen when we really heart to heart reach out and try to become more human. Reach out and make sure there's a place for our children to become what God meant for them to be. So get ready for this, just a 3-minute clip, and then I'll come back and we'll chat some more. So look at these pictures. First of all, I hope it makes clear to you that racism is not just about people of color. Actually, those folk up there, one was my best friend. I was the matron of honor at her wedding. Sandy Neely Smith. who was the student body president at Bennett College while she was there. And when she left, really headed for a fine career in nursing and medical research. Learned like I did, because when I went to school, I was going to be a doctor, and it was like, you know, you really can't make a difference until things are changed. As Gail said, unless you really deal with institutional structures that hold us back. I even had the privilege of being one of the earlier black students at Duke University in the 60s. I got very clear that it wasn't about just me being successful, but about my family, really about many others being successful. So that drew me more and more into the movement. So Sandy Neely Smith from Piedmont, South Carolina, the daughter of a textile worker and a school teacher. Then there's Michael Nathan, a medical doctor who made a conscious decision to work in an African-American hospital in Durham, Sterling, you might know about it, Lincoln Hospital in Durham. And then there was Bill Sampson, an Anglo-American who had finished at Harvard Divinity School, but who was also drawn to the textile mills of North Carolina seeking justice. And then there was Jim Wallen. Jim was another medical doctor, actually had taught at the Duke Medical School. But he let go his practice, or he practiced on the side, took care of all of us for no cost. Whenever you were late, you'd get a note from Jim about why you couldn't get to work when you were late. But he went to work in the textile mills. He said that it's like bandaging up people from a fall, and then you have to go out and see where the hole is, and you need to fill that in. So those are the institutional structural things. And then there was Cesar Cauce, whose family came over from Cuba. So you really have a little bit of you. You have America lined up. All of us were struggling together for racial equity, for economic justice. One of the two main places we were working were in education. North Carolina front runs good things and front runs bad things. So the Stop the Test effort was a lot of what we were doing. We formed a statewide coalition of people, all stripes and hues, coming together to a march that got stopped. We didn't realize how successful we were bringing people together. There were textile workers that we would work with who actually would go out and stand for African liberation, because they started becoming conscious that the well-being for them in the textile mills in North Carolina being underpaid was closely linked to what was going on to South African workers, to other people who were oppressed. That level of consciousness in Little Greensboro, North Carolina. So that is why that attack came, because people said, why in 1979 would that happen? And we wondered. But let me rush on, because I just have a few minutes, and we can talk more during the question time. We're just sharing 2 stories out of 42 plus years of marriage, so you know there's a lot of stories we have, but we're just going to do 2. And that is that William, we still call him Buster, said he was 8. Our 7 and 8-year-old daughters were with us at that march and rally, as were many other children among us, and many of the neighborhood children. Imagine the trauma that they had to go through, and just the fear that they had to experience. Sandy was like their aunt. She lived with me while she was at Bennett. Her mother sort of left her with a slightly older couple to kind of look after her daughter, you know. And one of the most difficult things I had to do was to call her mama and tell her that she was dead. Just imagine that. The whole town was terrorized. People tell me stories now about leaving, because this was 1979. Some of you who are young, that seems a long time ago. Buster was 8. But some of us, 1979 is not that long ago. And we thought the question of the Klan was over. But the significance of splitting off the races, which of course from the beginning is a construct, a human construct race, you know that we'll talk about that some other time. But that trauma that our children went through, we went through some ourselves, was overcome by the love and the nurturing of, for a while, that small community that grew. And we knew we couldn't just, we did to the courts, we marched, we cried, we were angry with all kinds of stuff, and it got clearer and clearer that it was about healing ourselves. We had to be the wounded healers to really move us forward. So we looked around And we borrowed from our friends in South Africa, in Peru. Bishop Tutu actually came to be with us in Greensboro 2 different times. Invited us over, and we went up, took our whole family. It was and about 20 other close friends. It was a healing experience for my family. It was so important for my then 7 and 8-year-old children, who were then in their mid-30s, to be embraced by their brothers and sisters in South Africa who endured some of the same things, and instilling in them the view that we have got to continue on this fight for ourselves and for humanity. But the thing I want to end with, as we move into Nelson with another story, is that even as we struggle over this question, the question of educational equity, economic equity, all those things were still there. Redistricting of voting lines and access to real democratic participation was still there. We continued to struggle over those things, and as we did, we told this story because the media tried to suppress it. Not Frank, Ms. Mickens. Frank has been a friend, but others. And so this story is a continuing one. We have many successes to share with you about it, though many things we're still struggling over. But the main thing, hear me, it is knowing that working together, we can make progress. That's the only way we can do it. You may work on one teeny part, but if you are aware how it is connected to the other part, you're on your way, you got it. So don't get tired, don't get weary, but know that you're going to be a little strained here and there, but hold on to some of this. Learn from the geese who know how to fly. We can do the same thing. So I'm going to end here. I think that Atlanta either has shown me that 1 minute or whatever, so I'm going to move on so that Nelson can come on and share another story, and then we'll come back and talk with you along with Gail. Bless you.
I was so impressed and so moved by Gail's presentation. And to realize your body, to borrow from her presentation, feeling a certain depthful warmness because the spirit of healing washes over the space. And I just want to thank God for you and for what was shared with us about how Kellogg has struggled with this question, that dogs and plagues not just our nation but the world. And so I'm very appreciative for that. I also want to express my sincere gratitude to the people of Mississippi. Those who in some sense have played a certain special role in the justice struggle. And some of the names just come to mind. Joyce named Fannie Lou Hamer, Medgar Evers, and many, many others. And we find those names on pages of books, but they're also stamped on our hearts. And we know that there are thousands of others, unnamed. And so in a sense, we want to thank you for your parents, for your grandparents, and to really call up the ancestors of years ago, because indeed they are a part of our struggle to live into the fullness of our humanity. And I appreciate Gail's sharing that that is a question of changing beliefs, that one cannot live ultimately above one's belief. And if you believe in otherizing and in some kind of justification that in spite of all pretensions, you're going to live around that level. So we just want to express our gratitude for being here. And we want to share a few insights, stories. Joyce has shared some of the things. I want to say a few more words about the struggle in Greensboro around the Klan and Nazi massacre. The work of organizing textile workers was closely linked to children. The work of organizing communities and trying to bridge the gap between false views of people who worked in the same place and who couldn't go to the same eating rooms and that kind of thing, and the work of raising the wages and creating better conditions was the work of standing for children. What children need are many things, but one thing I'm very clear on is they need adults, they need parents who are healthy parents, who are making an income and who can show the love for their children. That work was intimately connected to children. That incident that happened on that Saturday. Well, let me just go back and raise this. I was in a hospital not long ago, several years ago actually, and I met a young man that he was out in Morningside that day, along with my own children and many, many other children. And he said that he saw the brutal slaying of people, and people, bodies laying in the streets and on the grass, and blood soaking into the ground. And he rushed into his mother's house. And he said that they were virtually locked up that weekend. That was a Saturday. And then Monday came, and they all went to school. And nobody said anything about it. No counseling. No discussion of how to process that. No contextualizing that. And if you can imagine with me this young man sitting in a classroom on Monday morning, what manner of love, what manner of learning could occur there? Now I know that this was a concentrated set of factors, but I want to suggest to you today that in some kind of slow process, the same thing is happening to tens of thousands of children every day. And that's why it's so important that we unearth some of this, lift it up to the light of day, and engage it with the love that is capable of transforming them. I raised the question, what does it take to cause a huge part of a community to disbelieve the truths of its own story and to disbelieve its own history? And if you apply it to Greensboro, what level of fear is necessary to bend people into an unreality? What amount of fear and falseness is necessary to trump the truth? How much demonization needs to get done in order to turn justice fighters into monsters? And that's a question that I raised because, as I said, that's part of the reason why it was necessary to have some kind of process, not just for those little boys and girls in Morningside homes, and not just for those of us who were so deeply wounded, physically and otherwise, but also for the citizens of our city of all races and all hues who had consumed this. If you think of Love Canal, I need to get off of this because I want to say something else. There's a little city up in New York, and there was a toxic dump there, and they covered over the dump. I don't know if any of you remember that. and built the school on top of the dump. The kids were out playing in the playground. But there was something about the reality of that being under the soil. And so it just rose up and pushed its way through the beautiful grass, cracked the floor in the school, and came in. And in some sense, our culture is the same way. You can bury it, but it sinks deep into the soil and gets into the groundwater. And then we drink the groundwater and can't understand why we can't get along with one another. So a truth process was absolutely necessary. There's some other things I wish I had time to talk about, how we took 15 organizations and helped them come together to appoint the commissioners, and it was an amazing process. How before every public hearing, we had church gatherings, and people came up crying, black people, who said, I knew that this was not true, but I never bothered. And how we cried, and how we purged ourselves of some of the anger that we were carrying. And how a Jewish mother and her son and myself went over to Winston-Salem and met with the Nazi who killed her husband, and sat with him and saw him cry. But there was so much left undone. The stubbornness of the structures and the system would not study the 529-page report that took us through the Civil War and all the way up to the present. And so I thank God for that process. But I want to turn now, I don't know how much time I have. Say something to me.
10 minutes.
I got 10 minutes, okay. I want to turn to a struggle that we had in Greensboro that actually took place about halfway between '79 and now. And I'd gone to seminary. Actually, this struggle took me deep, deep down. I thought I understood how to make change. But then my soul got dry. There was no, the analysis and the theory and all of that wasn't really ministering to me. And that's why I was compelled to go back to a piece of the faith of my youth. From a little black church in Halifax County, we used to sing and I could feel it. And so that was very healing for me. It's 3 years in seminary. I don't know how much more Greensboro I could have taken. So I came back and we began this work that resulted in what you're going to see now. This was a different Kmart. It was mid-90s, the late 90s. It was comparable to Walmart at the time. Huge company. And young African Americans, 63%, a new place, 36 football fields in size, servicing 5 states with all good stuff, and just treated people wrong. I'll share you the details. And the young people rebelled against it. And I want to share this quick little story. They actually, Greensboro has a golf tournament. It gets televised. It's one of the biggest events in Greensboro. It's kind of like the Passover. I mean, everybody comes and celebrates, and it's sacred almost. And these young people went out on the golf course and sat in at the 18th hole on CBS television. Sacrilegious. And they all went to the court, and the judge said, don't do this anymore. I'm going to give you a suspended sentence. If I ever see you out here again, I'm going to make this sentence active. And they kept going. And they decided that they wanted to sit in at the Super Kmart store. And I, with another minister, stayed up until about 3 o'clock arguing with the union that we shouldn't do this. And it wasn't because I had a fundamental disagreement with it. It was because I knew that the young people there might get manipulated into in a kind of conflict. If you're sitting in the aisle and police come to arrest you and you move your hand and something falls down and there's a whole lot of noise. And so we persuaded them not to do it. They sided with us and not their own leadership, the clergy. It was an awful feeling when I left because I had no idea how they were going to move forward. I just opposed that. And so we got together, some ministers, and I started to, a couple of us, make the argument that if we think this is something that actually is not a bad tactic, we think that they are not ready for it. Who might be? And there we were in the middle. And so we went back and asked them. We had to make the argument about why we should do it. And it came down to this, that if they do it, they are going to jail. And imagine a family now divided. Imagine the children. Now no one is the breadwinner. Imagine the possibility of all of what might happen there. That's one scenario, and they were ready to do it. The other one is suppose the clergy did it. What would that scenario look like? And one guy said, minister said, you know, I've never been to jail. I said, congratulations. He said, what happens if I don't get out by my time on Sunday? I said, well, you know, if you have faithful members, they'll come see about you. If they don't come see about you, you have a problem anyway. It was a good discussion. And we made the decision to ask the workers to let us model this for them. And they said, please. And so we did. And we then got the business community involved. We turned Martin Luther King Day into a day that all of us would go out and do this. And we got the company to come to the table. And for about 5 weeks, we met every week with the business community, the mayor, and the workers, talking about what a vision for Greensboro might look like. And we got some agreements on we would not spend any money for companies coming in, putting, you know, roads and water and all of that, who did not pay not just a living wage at the time, but $12.50 in the late 90s. It didn't hold, and what you saw on the end was those other ministers being arrested. And what you saw on the end was that all of this got our city together. Far from dividing the city, far from the bitterness, the spirit that Sister Gail talked about that says forgive them because they don't understand what this is all about. Help them to understand it. And people staggered to the table and sat down, and there was not enough room. And we talked about where the city could go. Now, let me conclude with this. It's one thing to move forward. It's another thing to be able to sustain the space that you moved into. And what happened was that because there were so many tasks to be done, we kind of took our hands off of that, and it gradually moved backward. And one of the things that we came to is that we have to institutionalize community building itself as a way of life. Because you can win over here and they'll take it back over there. You win over here and you take it back over there. And so our work is community building. We name it that. And we focus on the most marginalized. And we have a large number of film like that that we could share. But I hope that you can appreciate why we are so grateful to hear a major foundation say we're going to lead with our heart. Actually, all the rest of it is there. Margin is not the most important thing, it's just a tactic. But when people's hearts starts to change, then we have a kind of movement tsunami where a whole new landscape is being put in place. And in order to do that, we take as our starting point that we believe in the dignity and the humanity of every person and all people. Whether they realize it or not is not our call, but we have to behave like, why would we want to do anything less? Because we become part of a co-creating process. And we, in that sense, are indeed our brothers and sisters, keeper and helper. And that we are challenged to move this society from where it is to a beautiful new place, that it can potentially take the tragedy of slavery and call out of all of that a beautiful society. But it requires commitment, dedication, focus, and the surrender of your heart. Thank you.
I have to tell on Reverend Johnson a little bit. Before we started the session, he said he was concerned because he felt as though the spirit in the room was right after Gail finished talking, and that by going on break, that maybe we would have lost a little bit of the spirit in the room. I think you all can agree that you all did a great job of reestablishing the spirit. So we can give them another. Now, recognizing that, and I know I'm feeling it, so I'm sure you're feeling it, let's just say we're adjusting the agenda as we speak.
Okay.
Go with me. I'm going to give this to Gail. And I'm going to ask the staff to get the handheld microphones out so that you're ready for questions. And would you like to just have it as open questions, or would you like to target a question? Open? Okay. Does anybody have a question or comment that you would like to make or share? We have somebody up front.
My name is Benita Burt, and I work in Jackson. And you know, I am feeling, I guess, I'm feeling exactly where I think that we all want to go. And I'm moving it from here to actually to my organization and to a place where, you know, what do I do now? Because while we're in this room, we are feeling it, and like the gentleman said, when I get back to Jackson, then I'm either going to feel isolated as my organization is sitting there and saying, you know, that was great, but how do I move it? How do I transfer to the community? You know, ministers give a lot of legitimacy to every effort in every community because people listen to our religious leaders. So, you know, I am thinking that if that kind of thing happens in communities, then it helps, because sometimes organizations look at like, why is this community-based organization working on something like this? I thought they were doing health and wellness and not making the connections. So I am hoping that at some time, even that the Kellogg Foundation has that legitimacy in communities to say, Kellogg is stepping out on this. And in your community, you have these organizations who are also stepping out on this. And what that does then is give us legitimacy to really raise it to the level that we need it, and then to be able to sustain it, but not only that, to bring on other people. So I'm hoping that at some point that we're able to do that kind of thing, and that gives community-based organizations a different level in terms of this work. So how did you do it?
It's as I said, it's an ongoing process. We are still doing it. But one thing I want to, first of all, I agree, we do have to have broad involvement. 2 years ago on Martin Luther King Junior Day celebration time, the Pulpit Forum, which is all black, all these people who minister to black congregations, invited other clergy in the city to come to the front and asked everybody to pray for them and what have you. There were about 70 people there who were Christian, Jews, Muslim. And since that time, there's now an interfaith clergy group, which our young staff member, where is Joe? He's been working the thing for us. But the young Reverend Joseph Ryerson is the co-chair, actually along with the elderly Bishop Alfred Chip Marble, who used to be the presiding bishop for the state of Mississippi, who's now an assistant bishop in Greensboro, a member of our board. I mean, he wasn't a member, this is kind of, the Spirit works all this stuff out. So, but I wanted to, there are just a lot of layers. The Chamber of Commerce president at one point was with us. Now, he ended up having to leave town, but I mean, he got convinced. We met with him in the homeless hospitality house that we run. We now feed over 200 people a day. There's a lot of features to our work. People then saw and felt and got convinced. But the particular thing I feel I need to say is that it's about legitimacy, for sure. But it really has to still be people's hearts and convictions being touched. Because when this process started, 20 years basically after the killings, it wasn't like we got a whole bunch of applause. Oh yeah, do that. You know, folks like, y'all are crazy. You know, you finally kind of legitimate in the community, you know, professor at the university, minister, and your children are doing well and whatever like that. But we couldn't let it rest, like Fannie Lou Hamer said. And we've carried on this process with no governmental support. In fact, they opposed it. Had you seen the full clip, you would have seen the city council voting to oppose the process. It's just a long thing, but it really was person by person, heart by heart, still struggling over those same things that people were won to it. You know, so yes, the Archbishop Tutu came over and all these folks, but there was a lot of just in the trenches kind of work, which is really what you're already doing, but you have to keep doing and being convinced that this is what's necessary and making those links to other people and having some time to talk about it. You've got to have some conversations.
I agree, and the power of the reality of the commitment of that you've experienced today in terms of the decades, you know, of the work. I interpreted your question to be a call for some help around how do you lead from this place when you go back. And I will only share a couple of insights that have emerged for us, even in our small group, you know, within the foundation, and also from communities. But you gotta have a core nucleus of people who have experienced a transformation together so that we understand together what we're dealing with. Do you know? And so it is, they're people, it's our own racial healing of the leadership cadre so that you can grow that leadership cadre, you know. So it might be that you take yourself and another person that you know who's here and some ministers, you know, and some teachers and some media people, but you form a leadership group and then you all get some support. We can recommend some people, you can use the resources here, but you need some help to go through a process where you develop a core understanding together that what you're dealing with is a symptom of a much deeper issue. And once you've got a nucleus of people who understand that and who are walking that walk together, then you have much more power, you know, to go forward together. So I do feel that we can't assume that even though we're in the same organization or we're in the same church or we're in the same sorority, you know, or we're on the same city council, that we understand this issue of racism. Because most people really don't understand what they're dealing with. And so there's this experience of learning that, and then from that comes the next
The work that you all have been doing, and you did, and you're moving around, where is the intersection of racism and classism?
Let me tell this little story. We had a press conference once, and it was the Kmart piece. And the reporter said, now, is this a race struggle or is this a class struggle? And I looked at her. I said, dear friend, let me ask you a question. If you can tell me whether slavery was a race question or a class question, I can answer your question. They are inextricably bound together. And everything in this country has the stamp of race on it. And so I think whatever you run into is going to be an intersection. It is the unauthorized separation, I think, where race is over here and something else is over there that presents us the problem. In a longer discussion, we could kind of see how it plays out on the ground, because on this one it came down to framing. When he asked that question, if my answer had been, yes, this is a race struggle, then the people who considered themselves not of that race were exempt. Or if I say this was a class struggle, then people who know about racism feel that you're not in touch with my reality. And so we said, it is a struggle that involves race and class and a number of other things, gender, because that was going on. But this is a community justice struggle where labor is the central focus for now. That way, the whole community now has to get into it. That's what when we went to the mayor, we said, this is your struggle. You know, you have to get in it. The preachers, we said, these are your members. I don't care about the union being in New York and all of that. These folk live here in our churches. And if we don't stand with them, then we are not standing with the authenticity of our own faith, in as much as you have done it to the least of these. And I'm telling you, if you get one or two good people in your group who understand out of the tradition, whatever it is, you have to engage the clergy. Because there is a book that can help you get there. But you have to work on it.
Mark, I think we had somebody right here.
Hi, my name is Portia Ballard SB. I'm with the Children's Defense Fund, and I want to thank the three of you for sharing your experiences and for your courage. And our work is about children, and I just want to know, how are you engaging? This is mostly to Reverend and Mrs. Johnson. How are you including children in the work that's being done so that history does not repeat itself? I just want to know how they're involved in the work that's ongoing in your area.
Well, some of the young folk who are here with us might want to add something. Wesley, some of you have heard from before. Elena there, who was I think about 23, so they were children not too long ago. But children are integral to our work. I mentioned to you that even in '79, the question of education for black children in particular was on the table. But even then we would say black children and poor white children. We didn't have the diversity that's beginning to grow in our state now. And so people came all over the state concerned that public education was under attack and the kids wouldn't be involved. But it wasn't just parents. Kids were involved in this in terms of their being educated, because we share with them. We cannot rely on the current institutions to teach our children. So there are a lot of formations. The Black Child Development Institute, we had some interaction with people from Children's Defense Fund. It was a summer program, I forgot the name of it. So yes, the Freedom Schools. So we work with a lot of those initiatives. But personally, people, if you saw some of the footage, as I said, it wasn't just our kids. Your children are alongside you. That's how they learn. That's how they learn what they have to do in this movement. They learn the truth. We have a grassroots history component at Beloved. Louis Brandon, who was not able to come, was a part of the 1960 sit-in. He was like, they call him the fifth man. He went the second day. When you come into Beloved Center, you're going to see all these pictures. You'll see different things to bring you in touch with reality. Buster was in history club at A&T, you know, so the tale is told, the truth is told. That's one of the recommendations from the Truth Report, is that the story of November 3rd, 1979, the before, during, and after piece, be integrated into the public school system. It's not officially there, but we're constantly invited, we're carrying that story and what have you. But the young people in town are still engaged. They've led many things and still do that today. Really, that's our hope. A lot of the training we do internships and all that, trying to make sure there's another generation coming through.
Particularly in the Boston area and in Chicago and some other places who were awarded grants for racial healing, have come up with unique innovations to engage young people. I'm going up to Boston in a couple of weeks to meet with young people, and they use what was called after-school time for these purposes, you know, for the education, for learning the history, for learning the skills, for coming together, for talking to each other as young people, because the lens of racism for a 13-year-old today is quite different, you know. But they've set aside, some adults have set aside that precious time from like 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock every day to bring these young people together, and so that they can build up their muscles, if you will, for being able to be grounded and to do this work. So there are other models emerging all over the country, but we have, as a foundation, have a commitment, you know, to young people, and we know that they have to be right at the center.
Thank you. In the center of the room, and then the last one is going to be in the far back left. I think that's Derek.
Hi, I'm Kim Duffy, and I'm with the Mississippi Center for Justice. And I just have, I guess it's more of a thought and maybe a question, I'm not really sure. I feel like, for example, when you asked the question about have you experienced racism, and I did not stand up, although there was a part of me that feels very much knows what it's like to have a higher consciousness of discrimination, because I work so intrinsically in the disability world. So I feel like I'm almost split at all times, because when I'm in the disability world, and that's what I call it, because we all meet separately, and we go to school separately and all that, we're in the disability world, and the issues of racism sometimes get brought up, and the comparisons and the struggles are our model. I mean, the civil rights, it is very much the model for the disability world. But when I'm here, we don't discuss or bring in the disability world issue. And I guess, like, for example, when we're talking about the denial and the minimization, and then even being able to practice, because all those things that we're not comfortable talking about race issues, people who are very comfortable talking about race issues aren't comfortable talking about disability issues, aren't comfortable talking with a person with a disability, aren't comfortable even knowing how to practice doing all those sort of things. So I guess I'm interested in knowing if you see a way of integrating those worlds for me, if not for other people.
I'll start on that one. I appreciate your asking the question, and I'm going to do it in two parts. First, I want to say that one of the grants that I'm most proud of at the Kellogg Foundation is to an organization called TASH. And the people that came to us and asked for the grant were the people of color within the broader community of persons with disabilities. And they shared with us the stories of what it's like to be a person with a disability, and the discrimination, but then to compound that discrimination under the rubric of racism. And they gave some of the data and some of the facts. So clearly, you know, we understand and are committed to that, and are trying to help that organization. It's kind of like, is it a class or race issue? You know what I mean? Race is always the backdrop in our society. It doesn't matter. And as a person with a disability, you know, I struggle constantly with my own self-esteem as to whether I'm being discriminated against because I'm black, a woman, or a person with disabilities, right, or this nut alternative health provider. You know, I used to say to folks, I'm a minority within a minority that is a minority. But it really doesn't matter in the sense that if my full humanity is not being embraced, you know, if the divine spark within me is not seen or showing, is not lit, it doesn't matter why it's not, you So there's a twofold answer to that, but the one thing I just had to write an article for Grant Makers in Health, and they're having a big convening, and so it'll be about 500 foundations there, and they asked me to write an essay, and I just said, okay, I'm gonna dive in the deep end, and I'm gonna write it about racism, right? And so one paragraph in that essay says, when you first lift up racism in the context in which we've lifted it up, you will hear calls for, but what about sexism? And what about persons with disabilities? And what about homosexual and heterosexual issues? You know, what about all these other isms or other ways that we otherize in our society? Let's deal with that. In fact, sometimes we were called racist because we were going to deal with racism and not all the other isms, not anti-Semitism, you know, etc. And so where we stand pretty firmly in this is that we understand the injustice of all isms. And we respect that there is a need to make them all go away. But because our commitment is to vulnerable children, and we are a national foundation, and the broader demographic trend in our nation, most of the children in this country today that are being born are children of color. And most of those children are growing up in low income and in impoverished households. So step back for a minute. If most of the children in this country are children of color, and most of them are facing economic hardship, what does this bode for the future of the United States? If we don't deal with racism. And so we're not saying all those other issues aren't important, they are. But we, for this point in time, and for the foreseeable future, have chosen to bring this right squarely into the middle. And we stand with that, and we're proud of that.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the question, and I strongly agree with what Gail has shared. This question comes to us a lot. And I've used a lot of analogies. Look at, like if you're coming up against a giant, that's another one of the sort of militaristic things. Like what is the real giant in our society? As we're saying, Gail showed us worldwide. It is that difference along racism, but it really is the one that helps feed all the other isms and what have you. But as we grow to understand how these things are used to really keep us all down, I'll give you one quick example. In our state, we will have on the ballot this question of what constitutes marriage or does not. Now, it is being framed in terms of moral question, religious question, whatever like that. For some people, in their minds, it may be that. But trust me, it's not about that. It's really to separate, divide, that coming together I'm talking to you about in North Carolina that's going on. Back in 2 weeks, we're going to be all of us together in Raleigh for something called HKOJ, thousands of people. So we tell people, and Nelson's a black preacher in the South. But he was down standing against this amendment where the Constitution is now going to tell you how you are to carry on your personal life and dictate to you how your religious beliefs should go. And our call to our brothers and sisters who are also of color, where the question of homosexuality and all this kind of stuff really can throw us into all kinds of places. But it's really geared to split the growing unity there, and it's really aimed at 2012. That we're going to be hosting a Democratic convention. I know we're nonpartisan here. But it's like we're just looking at the reality. It's all very well framed, and when we fall into those silos of things, we really do injustice. Mainly, we're fighting for humanity. So disabilities, whatever it is, language, all those things are problems. But we've got to frame them all in the same context. But if we go at the giant and get that while also supporting these other things, we're on our way, y'all.
I'm going to take the last question back here.
Rarely do we hear people talk about racial healing or racial reconciliation. In Mississippi, the conversation is void of any real action. of present-day issues. So my question is, how do we move people from the dialogue to the work? Part one. And then part two.
No, sorry. Say part two. No, go ahead.
It's very quick.
Okay.
And then part two, as we go through many public policy discussions in the state, many groups who try to address the issues do so without a real historical context or analysis. And as a result of that, using the charter school as an example, we're having this discussion around a false choice between charter schools or public education, when the real issue is quality education for all children. And disconnected from the history of public education in Mississippi, we're falling to false choices. And a lot of that is the reality of, in the state, people are run from the issue of race. Progressive organizations don't want to deal with it, and so when racial issues take place, they always turn to one or two groups and say, well, that's what y'all do, as opposed to really stepping up and putting their hand on the plow, because no one will want to move from the dialogue or the discussion or the monthly meetings and really talk about the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. I've been looking for you the whole weekend. Let me start with, I think one important piece we call in our little paper framing and naming. Whoever frames something sets the context, establishes the lens through which you see and understand something, and therefore race becomes a diversion for so many people, and that's how they frame it. I think we have to do exactly the opposite. That it is central to any significant movement forward, and especially for one of the most affected. So I think framing it is the first thing, so that you get the right understanding of why this is important, versus all of these side arguments that take us down some unauthorized roads. The second thing on the action, I think we're back to a group of people that you can persuade to help do something. This is an example I will use, when we brought the issue of the clergy in Greensboro has act on this. And we need to, if we say these young people should hold back on this, they're getting ready to do some things that they don't have to do if they had some help. Some people said, if this were about education, I would do it. If this were, and they named about 5 other things. And we actually had to then guide the argument so that we could get an outcome. And the outcome was this. People wanted to take a vote. And we were saying, no, let's not do that. That we're called to move by conscience. So those of us who believe that this is the action we need to take, and we're called by conscience, let us do it, okay? Those who do not believe, and you're called by conscience not to do it, then don't do it. And what we agreed on is that those of us who will take this action will not criticize those who don't take it, and those who do not take it will not criticize us who take it. And we worked it out that way. And after a while, half of the people who wouldn't go at first came at second, and a few more came at third. But what you have to do is keep the movement moving. If you stop and end in these eternal debates trying to get everybody on board, my experience has been that actually is dysfunctional. So I hope that's helpful. And I know you have the answer, and I'll ask you about it when the meeting is over.
Absolutely, that's it. You know? The only thing I would just put out for us to consider, we have old models. You know, we have existing models of how change occurs. There's a place for the tactic of marching. You know, there's the place for the tactic of boycotting. There's a place for the tactic of sitting in. You know, there's a place for the tactic of negotiating. There are different things that apply in different situations. I think what we have to be careful about is not demanding of others what they do at a particular moment in time, you know. Because when we do that, we judge others. And when we judge, we create separation. Now, sometimes an executive in an organization has a certain level of power and authority, and all they have to do is say a word or sign a document, you know, which the change ripples for years to come. A school board president or a doctor can make a decision of whether they're going to perform a particular surgery or not because, you know, they understand. They make a choice. So I'm just saying that there are many different kinds of actions, and we want to be mindful to create the common understanding. When I went to bed last night, I prayed for guidance on this, and it was really impressed in my head about this importance of understanding, you know, in all that getting, get understanding. You know? And when we as in this work get this depth of understanding, and it's not just dialogue, it's not just conversation, it's understanding. Then we are moved from within to take the actions that are necessary. And we get real clear about what they are. Now, for us at the Kellogg Foundation, the action is to make sure that we support Mississippi and the identified communities in Mississippi to improve the outcomes for vulnerable children. We got that. And you will help us figure out how best to do that. You know, that's our action. That's what we can do as a philanthropy. But others will have other actions, because that's what they can do from where they are.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your comments and your questions today. And then I'd also like to thank what turned into a panel. And I appreciate your comments today and everything that you gave to us, so thank you again.